Hi again, guys. Okay, so on part 1 I actually made up a programmer for the ATtiny microcontroller, and this is the one here, which I then connected to this little board HD or HW260, and I'll put that aside. Since then I have received this little board here, which works in conjunction with this. You basically plug this thing. It came with this cable, and I bought a little adapter with it at the same time, and it just plugs in like that, and then you can use this little board here, or I suspect you can probably use it with other boards as well, but this one is particularly convenient because this has a 6-pin plug on there which actually matches the top 6 pins of this little these pins over here. If you look at the bottom of it, you will see that 5 volts is this outer pin over here, so that is this pin here. And if you look at this little device over here, you will see this says VCC, so therefore, and I've checked all the other pins, they match, so therefore you can plug this directly into that using that little adapter. If you don't have the adapter, you don't have to use this cable. You could certainly use, some of these little DuPont pin type things, female ones, and plug them directly into the socket here, and then onto this board or any other board that you have, to use the pins 13, 12, 11, and 10 is what it actually uses. However, when I started to look into this, the information on this little board here is very vague and also very old, 6 years old on average, and it tells you to install a driver and so on, which is not correct. So we'll go into this, how to make this thing work in 2023. Secondly, I got this little board here, which is actually a little kit. You got to solder it up yourself. Came with some additional sockets over here, which of course would fit over here, and it has a crystal which it's according to the diagram supposed to go over here. However, this crystal would only be used, and a couple of little capacitors would only be used if you are going to program this 80 mega 8 or 80 mega 328p. I have no such intentions, but you might, and then you would want to populate these things. And same here, this is for a different kind of microcontroller, ATtiny8313 it says, and this is for an ATtiny85. If I ever get some of those, then I would put the socket on there. Then that's all I would have to do. The sockets for crystals here, but they don't need them. But we are only dealing with ATtiny85 here, so therefore I've only populated, put this socket on, and put the LEDs on and some resistors and that little capacitor. But I did add another little bypass capacitor at the bottom. There was no room for that on that PCB, and I know that some ATtinys are kind of sensitive, so I thought it would be a good idea to put a little extra bypass capacitor, 100 nanofarads, on the bottom there, but it probably will work without it. I'm not sure. This is just an old Arduino UNO, and this little board here, you are supposed to plug it into the UNO like that, but then I found as soon as I plugged it in, I ran it off externally off 9 volts on my bench power supply, and suddenly the bench power supply, I had set it for 400 milliamps maximum, it was bottoming out. It was short-circuiting, and I found that this board here, the pins of this socket here, were making contact with the metal of this USB socket and was shorting the board out. So I therefore I put some tape on the bottom of here to stop that from happening. I'm not sure if some other ATtiny's have sockets on them that are higher than these, or have a socket that is made out of plastic or that is not as high as this one. I don't know, but this particular one, it's probably some sort of Chinese clone. I'm not sure, but in any case, that is what I had to do. And then you would just plug it into the Arduino UNO, and we will go to this. Behaves exactly the same as what I've already shown with the Nano. With this Nano board over here, you do exactly the same thing. You just upload the ISP software to it, and from there on it is exactly the same. So I'm not sure if I really need to demonstrate this one. So it works exactly the same as the Nano version that I made over here. This one, however, is a different story. We'll go into that, but just to remind us where these things came from, let's have a look. So this guy here came from AliExpress, and it was advertised as a TZT one-piece USBASP, USB ISP, AVR programmer, USB ISP, whatever. Says it supports Windows 7 64. I guess that's how long these things have been around. I'm not sure, but I got the one with the little adapter which I showed you. Okay, so that is one, and the other one was this board here, which was ATtiny blah 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 soldering kit for Arduino UNO. And as you can see, as I said, I didn't bother populating these other sockets until if and when I ever get a microcontroller that needs them. So I've only populated just the bare essentials, which is these little headers and the LEDs and the one socket and the resistors, which works just fine. Okay, so I'm going to plug this USB ACE plug into my computer, and we will have a look at I've got the device manager brought up here, and we will have a look what happens. So if you first plug it in without having a driver loaded for this thing, you will find that a little device will show up here, a USB ASP. And it will have a little attention marker next to it, and if you click on it, it'll say there's no driver for this thing. It'll say USB ASP. But if you use this ZADIC tool in order to install a driver for it, then it will come up under USB serial bus devices, and as you can see, it'll say USB ASP. So it'll be happy. So what you do is, if it doesn't have a driver, and the first thing you run this ZADIC tool, you will find that it will already be selected. It will say USB ASP. I had to list all devices after it is connected, otherwise it only shows up once it don't have a driver. So you have USB ASP. Now all the instructions that I have seen that are old, they say, oh, you got to use a 32-bit libUSB driver, and they actually tell you to use this driver over here, but that will not work, at least not on my machine using Windows 10 and the latest version of the Arduino IDE version 2 point whatever. So instead I installed the WinUSB driver to it, and I'm not going to do it again. If you don't have a driver at all, it'll complain if you try to run it in the connect to it, the Arduino IDE. It'll complain that 16CO on my device. That's what the ID is. 05DC. It does not have a driver or cannot be connected, or make sure that you upload the latest version, whatever. It comes up with a bunch of little error messages. So this is what you will need to do. Just give it the old WinUSB driver using that Zadek tool, and I've shown in the previous part of this video where to get this thing from, and everything will be happy. So we can close these things off and run the Arduino IDE. Okay. So what you will want to do, of course, before I showed how to install the Arduino ATtiny board, so you can refer to part 1 if you are not knowing how to do that. This is just on how to get that little board, that in a USB ASP injector board going. So what we will do, the first thing you would do is to go to this board manager, and you would select the board, which is the ATtiny85, and there's no port there, but that's okay. And you would go to Tools and make sure that the programmer is set to USB ASP, and ATtiny85, 8 megahertz, and you would say burn bootloader. Now you get these little error messages. I'm not sure what you'd have to do to get rid of those, but it seemed to work perfectly, ignoring those. AVR dude, warning, cannot set SDK, period. Check for USB ASP firmware update. This would be the firmware on the little board, and it is potentially possible to update it on that board. There's a jumper on there which is for that purpose, but I'm not entirely sure where I would find such firmware. Maybe I could find it, but it doesn't seem to matter. It seems to work perfectly anyway, so I'm not going to bother. So now we have burnt the bootloader, which in other words, the little ATtiny now has a little bit of code on it that knows how to receive the actual sketch that we're going to send it. And what we are going to do is we're going to say file, where is it, examples, basics, and let's try the fade one, because we're always doing blink. Kind of gets boring, doesn't it? I'm going to close this one off in the background, and I'm going to maximize that one. And on the ATtiny, pin number 1 is capable of doing PW analog writes to, so we change that to pin 1 again, and that's all we need to do. and then we will go to verify that it's happy. And remember, we don't use that upload button. We go to tools, not tools, sketch, upload using programmer. Done uploading. Then we got those little AVI dude error messages, and we are not going to bother to worry about that. And now let's have a look if it was successful. And indeed it seems to be. See this LED over here, so it blinks but it fades in and out. That's what it does. Okay, so that is how you use this thing. Yet another option. I'm not sure how often I will use this one. It seems to work fine, but of course I made my own programmer. Now, as I said, this one over here, I guess we can run it just so you can see, just in case. The boot measure. Just hold on. Okay, let's plug it into the USB port. It has the same LED that the one that I made has on it to show that it is actually connected. This is that it's got power, and this one is that it's waiting. See, it kind of fades in and out. And it's the same deal when we go to display capture. So we would select, first we would select the UNO. And it is on COM port 9, that is correct. And now we should be able to examples, Arduino ISP, as usual we will uncomment this, like so, and we can, okay, it compiles and it's uploading. Now the only strange thing that I have noticed is I've got the little hat plugged in, and then it refuses to upload. So I find that I have to go and remove it. Let's unplug it for a second. I find that I have to remove it in order for it to be able to upload this ISP software. So let's try it again. Okay, now it does work. And now I can plug this little into it again. And it is okay. So it doesn't like uploading with this board plugged in, so keep that in mind. Okay, so what we need to do is to go to Tools, and make sure that ATtiny85, 85, we are on COM9, 8 MHz, ATtiny85, Arduino as ISP. That is set correctly, and then we should be able to say burn bootloader. Okay, it's done, and then we should be able to go to, we've got the ATtiny blink up here, pin 1 on the ATtiny. So now that we have the ATtiny85 selected and having all the correct settings, ATtiny85, COM9, and so on, we now should be able to actually go to Sketch and say upload using programmer. There, you see the little green light flashing, done uploading. Now the only thing is with this particular board, of course you can't see it running because this is connected to the UNO underneath. Whereas if you're using this little board over here, at least it's got an LED on it, and you can actually see it doing its business. Okay, well, so that is it. Some extra information about these programmers and how to set them up. As I said, the UNO one, that's exactly the same as the Nano, so if you want additional information about that, you can look at the part 1. And this one here, once you know that you got to use the Win USB driver with it and use the programmer, which is called USBASP, everything seems to work. You just get a few error messages which are not important. Okay, so that's it. Just a little bit of extra information on those different programmers as promised.